Hello, my name is Farah Pai, and this is something that I've been working on. A three-layer ontology for liminal displacement, temporal re-indexing, and the instrumental nature of time. We propose a three-layer ontological framework to reconcile apparent faster-than-light displacement and time travel with local causality, without invoking global timeline violation or paradox resolution mechanisms. In this model, space-time constitutes an index domain governed by relativistic constraints, while a liminal boundary layer permits entities to exist without spatial or temporal coordinate assignment. Transitions between these layers occur through discrete boundary events, observable within spacetime but not generated by it. A third observer-mediated layer governs identity continuity and coordinate reassignment upon re-entry, constraining paradox formation through local coherence rather than universal consistency. We further argue that time is not an ontologically fundamental feature of space, but an instrumental construct employed by aware and self-aware systems to impose continuity and causal order upon change. This reframing allows for temporal relocation as controlled reindexing rather than causal reversal, preserving physical law while expanding interpretive scope. The apparent incompatibility between faster-than-light travel, FTL travel, time travel, and relativistic causality has long constrained speculative physical models. Traditional approaches either prohibit such phenomena outright or resolve them through branching timelines, closed time-like curves, or ad hoc paradox suppression. These approaches tend to treat space-time as ontologically closed and time as universally fundamental. In contrast, this paper explores a model in which space-time is locally complete but globally open, embedded within a broader ontological structure that permits boundary conditions beyond coordinate indexed reality. Central to this framework is the distinction between motion within space-time and displacement via non-indexed boundary states. We further contend that time, while indispensable to physical description, functions as an instrument of continuity rather than a primary constituent of reality. Space-time constitutes the first ontological layer, a domain in which entities are fully indexed to spatial and temporal coordinates. Events within this layer are characterized by mandatory coordinate assignments, such as the directions of X, Y, and Z, and then the induction of time, the variable of time. Then there are local directional causality, finite information propagation bounded by light speed, and continuous identity persistence along world lines. This layer successfully accounts for classical mechanics, relativistic physics, thermodynamics, and the everyday experience of causation. However, it is intrinsically conservative. It records the constraints, and constrains events, but does not generate its own boundary violations. To specify that clearly, this layer successfully accounts for classical mechanics, relativistic physics, thermodynamics, and the everyday experience of causation. However, it is intrinsically conservative. It records and constrains events, but does not generate its own boundary violations. Crucially, spacetime cannot internally authorize discontinuous relocation in either space or time. Any such occurrence must therefore originate outside its ontological jurisdiction. The second layer, here termed liminal space, is not an alternative spacetime nor higher dimensional extension. It is a boundary condition in which coordinate indexing is suspended. Entities in this layer retain state and identity, but are not assigned position or external temporal order. As a result, Distance and velocity are undefined. External time does not apply. Causality becomes non-local and non-directional. Persistence does not require duration as measured in space-time. Liminal space permits displacement without traversal. An entity exiting space-time may later re-enter at an arbitrary coordinate without violating local physical law, because no superluminal motion occurs within space-time itself. The observable effects are discrete boundary events marking exit and re-entry. This layer enables apparent FTL phenomenon and temporal relocation while preserving relativistic constraints locally. The third layer governs the assignment of coordinates, identity continuity, and narrative coherence upon re-entry into space-time. This observer layer is not equivalent to consciousness per se, but rather the mechanism by which events become indexed and intelligible within space-time. Its functions include assigning spatial and temporal coordinates at re-entry, maintaining identity across discontinuous transitions, enforcing local consistency without global timeline rewriting, limiting paradox formation through probabilistic incoherence constraints. Observable phenomena such as increased coincidence, paradox sensitivity, or self-interaction risk arise not from violations of physical law, but from excessive density or overlap of boundary events within a shared causal neighborhood. Within this framework, time is treated not as a fundamental property of space, but as an instrumental construct employed by aware and self-aware systems to impose continuity upon change. This position avoids the extremes of denying time's reality or treating it as an absolute substrate. Instead, non-aware systems undergo change without temporal reference. Aware systems detect sequence and causation. Self-aware systems deploy time reflexively, constructing memory, anticipation, and narrative identity. Time is therefore real in application, but contingent in ontology. It emerges as at the interface between observer-mediated indexing and space-time constraint, functioning as a bookkeeping system necessary for coherence rather than an intrinsic feature of space itself. The existence of liminal states in which entities persist without temporal indexing demonstrates that time is not required for existence, only for description within space-time. Under this model, time travel is not reversal, branching, or causal violation. It is controlled re-indexing across ontological layers. An entity exits space-time, persists in non-indexed liminal state. Correction, an entity exits space-time, persists in a non-indexed liminal state, and re-enters space-time at a different temporal coordinate. Local causality remains intact between boundary events, while global consistency is preserved through observer layer constraints. Self-interaction across temporal anchors is anchored not by physical prohibition, but by the collapse of narrative degrees of freedom that result from excessive index overlap. Ethical restraint thus emerges as a natural consequence of coherence preservation rather than an imposed rule. This framework offers several implications. Apparent FTL travel is compatible with relativity without invoking exotic matter or space-time deformation. Time travel does not require timeline branching or paradox resolution. Non-local phenomena may be reframed as boundary effects rather than violations. Conscious systems play an active role in temporal coherence, not as creators of reality, but as managers of intelligibility. Importantly, the model preserves known physical laws while expanding the ontological context in which they operate. Conclusion. By distinguishing between index spacetime, liminal boundary states, and observer-mediated indexed assignment, we provide a coherent framework in which displacement beyond light speed and temporal relocation can occur without violation of causality, recasting time as an instrumental construct rather than a fundamental medium, resolves long-standing conceptual tensions, and reframes time travel as re-anchoring rather than reversal. This model invites further exploration at the intersection of physics, philosophy, and cognitive science, particularly regarding the role of awareness in structuring reality. So, there you go. That is what I did, and please enjoy. Possibillabees.